I'm sure you've heard Jesus say that we are not to cast our pearls before swine. Have you ever wondered just what that means? This week on Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake, we'll learn how to be discreet with our pearls. Drake Hunter is senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, founder of the nonprofit 4-Dimensional Living, as well as the author of 3 books, including his latest, Wonderfully Weird, and the soon-to-be-published 4th book, Wonderfully Weird Goodness. Now, this week's edition of Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake Hunter. Well, we do welcome you back once again to Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. I'm your host, John Waters, and with us again this morning, fortunately, Pastor Drake. Good morning.
Good spring morning. It's a lovely spring, I should say, day.
Yeah. And, you know, springtime in Colorado is a special time, no doubt about it. Spring and fall both are just beautiful times of the year in Colorado.
And you know that's with hope because we pre-record this, so I'm hoping it's a beautiful spring morning when you're listening to this.
It absolutely is, no doubt about it.
Yes.
So, well, this morning, as we continue our trek, this journey in the wonderfully weird commands of Christ that we've been on, we come to number 17, Drake, which is one that people see this in the Bible,
yes.
But I don't know if people understand what it means. And actually, I'll be brutally honest, I didn't understand it until just a few years ago, really. And that is the command that Jesus gives us in Matthew 7, don't cast pearls.
Yes, a very familiar command, not only to let's say the Christian world. I heard this all the time in my military experience over 21 years. This was often used, and of course, in that reality that I lived for so many years. And so, yeah, and it's one of those commands, like you said, very abstract. Mm-hmm. You know, it's an analogy here, a couple of analogies. And so what does it mean not to cast your pearls? And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. So, yeah, I'm excited about this one because I do believe a lot of people will, first and foremost, understand what it is generally, but they will also understand it once we get into it. And they're like, oh, I get it. I see what it is. And then truly practice it as it's been taught through Jesus's teachings, where you can truly become a person who knows how to have this habit known as discretion. And that's what we're after, rather than just being simple-mindedness and just allowing our words just to float anywhere and everywhere and getting ourselves in trouble.
Well, let's add to the abstraction, if you will, by asking the question that, you like to ask. You like to set these up with a question.
Yes.
And I think that the question this week will add to that abstraction, but yet make perfect sense as we talk here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask that question is, do you think and feel, there's some abstraction right there. Do you think and feel you can keep a secret? That is the question. And of course, there's thoughts all over the place here. There's 2 sides to all of this. But I did ask this question a couple of weeks ago in one of our classes, and I asked this question, and the first response was very reactive on the students' part, and they were very disgusted with the question because most people in the class said, we hate secrets. I followed up and said, well, be very careful with that because truly the Bible is filled with discrete information, or we can even say secrets, that we need to learn how to interpret and uncover so we can live out life properly through those instructions that we truly see in the Bible and can interpret and truly apply to our life.
You just used a word there that's going to become very important today. You said discreet or discretion.
Yes.
And that's actually what this command is all about.
That's exactly what it's all about. So let's let's read Matthew 7. Let's see. We'll
Verse
read
6.
Verse 6. Let's do that one. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, John, I've been called a lot of things, and one of them, I've been called a dog before, so I can kind of relate with this passage here because, we use that type of language in our everyday, language, and we don't realize that there is a message, and just like there's a message in our everyday communication, there's definitely one here. So let's kind of look through this and what it truly means. Don't cast pearls. So You lead, John.
All right. Well, we're going to talk some about you mentioned your time in the military, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But
Yes.
before we get to that, let's define what discretion is, and then talk about the importance of discretion when it came to what your role was in the military.
Absolutely. Well, straightforward. Here's the description. This is how we define discretion. Discretion is using wisdom. Now, you got to go back to last week's podcast or radio show that we produced last week to understand what that is. But discretion is using wisdom to avoid damaging attitudes, words and actions, and giving insightful counsel. Now, we can add to that. Discretion is knowing when is best to say. Here's a big one: nothing at all. As James shares in James 1, slow to speak. Last week we talked about, making sure we're quick to listen, but we have to be slow to speak. And that's what discretion is all about. Discretion is looking past problems and considering the potential of a person or project rather than falling into all of the negativity and all of the issues and all of that. But up front, that's exactly what discretion is. So we've got to look past those problems and consider what the potential, and we can even use the word purpose here, of that person and or project. So those, I think that will does that give a good definition?
So you've mentioned at different times as we've been doing this program about your history in the United States military, in the Air Force.
Yes.
But one of the things I find really fascinating about your time, and you've told me some about this, is time that you spent, let's say, in the intelligence community.
Yes.
Special investigations and things like that. Talk about that in the context of discretion.
Yeah, from the year 1996 to the year 2000, as I was serving our country, I was with an organization, OSI. Now, that's Air Force OSI, which is nothing more than the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. Now, folks, if you're wondering what that is, well, just think of the TV series NCIS, which is Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We're with sister units. I'll get that out.
Same thing, just Air Force rather than the Navy.
That's exactly right. And that was my responsibility for those years. And of course, I think most people realize that there is a system in the DoD system that deals with clearance or I should say discretion, that then gives some type of level of trust that then we can truly understand who we have in front of us, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say there's a security clearance system that exists in the DoD system that shares with an investigator or whoever you're connecting with, shares how much you can trust the person in front of you. Are they discreet or not? So there's different levels of discretion, and we know there's confidential, secret, and top secret.
So they probably asked you, do you think and feel that you can keep a secret?
Yes. Now, in OSI, though, you have those three levels, but then you get into these career fields or these jobs in the military that you even have to go one up. So you have a top secret clearance or with a designator, if you will, known as a, get this out, SCI. I can remember. It's been 16 years since I've been in that reality. But so the top secret SCI, which SCI just simply means sensitive compartment, if I remember right, compartmentalized information.
Okay.
So basically what that means, you got a top secret clearance, you get into this job, this career, and it's compartment through that job, and that gets even more sensitive. So as an OSI person, you're investigating some crazy things. It's always about the federal crime when it comes to OSI or NCIS, and they primarily investigate felony crimes such as murder, robbery, rape, all kinds of high profile crime activity. And so you have to have the highest clearance because there might be a crime committed that involves a general or high officers. So you have to, and you gather this information and you have to be extremely, let me use the word now, discreet. And you are given trust through that system.
And so you really learn then to listen, and keep the mouth closed.
Yeah, you're quick to listen, and the military does a great job here. What we need to do is transfer that to the Christian church, because it is huge. So if I asked you, what clearance level do you have as a Christian, where would that sit? What level are you at? Are you at, no level? You can't be trusted at all or very little, or maybe you have a confidential level that you can share some things, but maybe the urge is too much once you find out something and you're telling everybody everything. Gossip, right? Or how about the secret clearance or top secret? Or are you at that very top level with those different degrees of SCI clearance that goes with that, with the designation and all of that? Well, I guess I could ask some people that live around you what that reality is, because we can say whatever we want, but the reality is, if I went and did an investigation, let's say on who you are, what would that reality be?
Yeah.
Are you discreet? Do you have discretion? Well, the only way to do it is to follow this wonderfully weird command, do not give your dogs what is sacred, or that command, don't cast pearls. And of course, pearls are those treasures you have. And you don't want to pass it to somebody who's going to trample all over those pearls, because that's exactly what a pig does. And I've made many mistakes, and I've given some information, even some instructions, and tried to influence people. But good night, they take it and they trample all over it. And if they don't do that, perhaps they are more like that dog, and they rip it apart. They're critical, they're mean, they're nasty, and all they're going to do is rip you apart because you did not practice discretion. You were not discreet, slow to speak, and it just destroyed many things and caused a lot of pain, hurt, and suffering because we didn't practice discretion.
Well, and quite often that comes from, as you mentioned earlier, we are so quick to give our opinion, or to quote unquote, you can't see my fingers, but quote unquote, give help.
Yes. With my opinions, with that, I think I can fill in the gap, which then some people call this grace. Well, grace is true knowledge, not just your opinion, to fill in the gap. And so, yes, we want to help. But if you think about that, when you have this urge, you have this power that's, I just got to say it. Well, I understand what that is, but understand there's something lacking. And what is lacking is self-regulation, or we can say self-control, one of the fruits of the Spirit. And if we miss that mark, in the sense of truly developing self-regulation or self-control, and we're just out of control. We're never going to experience that, first and foremost, that fulfillment or that peace that we're after in our soul. Because the other side of this is, once you get there and you are discerning and you're becoming wise in who you are, and you can discern it, then slow to speak, then you can ask the right questions, you can seek after some things, and then you can actually give some good insight to whatever that problem is, so that you're truly helping in the sense of healing and helping people move forward to reach their best potential. And that's what it's all about.
Discretion also, though, Drake, I think you kind of alluded to this, but let's get it out there. Discretion also is not getting lost in the problem. It's keeping your eye on the purpose.
Yes.
And if we get lost in the problem, that's where we end up many times losing discretion.
Yeah, we can never forget we're Christians, and our perspective, our ultimate view is always God's goodness, and we have to have that vision in our minds, and we got to be perfect with that. We talked about that command a few weeks back, and we have to stay focused on that vision of God the Father's goodness and understanding that that's very good. And when we can stay focused, first and foremost, generally speaking, on that vision of God's goodness, and then we can reduce that and come back to whatever reality that we are in at that moment, and then start listening and seeing that person in their goodness, and also making sure that we see ourselves in that goodness, and making sure that we're offering good information and instruction so that we can influence well, so that, again, together we can truly become our very best, where we're better together.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring it down where the rubber meets the road here and talk about why discretion is so important, because there's more layers to it than what we've just talked about.
Absolutely. And I think people will understand why it is so important. Now, discretion simply protects a person's, let's say, health, wealth, and wisdom. Good night. If I was a good preacher, I'd have 3 W's there, but there you go. But
Well-being instead of health.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there you go. You're a good preacher. So why is discretion important? Discretion simply protects, that's perfect, John, a person's well-being, wealth, and wisdom. You're quick, John. That's creative. Good job. So, yeah, that's exactly right. And, of course, we can go to Proverbs 2:11. Discretion shall preserve thee, as the King James Bible puts it. Preserves these, understanding shall keep thee. And recall wisdom. Wisdom, there's different factors, but there's that knowledge, experience. But here, right, what we just read out of Proverbs 2:11, understanding. And it's that understanding that will keep you in the place that you need to be so that you can be the reflection or that image of God that God needs you to be to carry out the plan. And so, that's one reason. Here's another one. Discretion develops and exercises an understanding heart, right? Because we've got to listen to the truth. We got to bring that in, and we've got to lay up those treasures, and then we seek after God's kingdom, judge not, and then we get here, and then we get those treasures, and it's through that understanding that we develop those habits that are now in our heart, and then we become second nature in these beautiful habits of Christ, or we can say treasures, that really gives us a life where we can live out that wisdom. So another reason is discretion treasures. What am I trying to say here? Discretion treasures and uses wisdom. So let me say that again. Discretion treasures and uses wisdom. That's why it's so important. We are to be wise, and we treasure that. And of course, number 4, just to wrap things up with a good number here, discretion controls destructive emotions. Can we go back to self-control on this one? It's so important that we understand. Now, a couple of verses I always relate with this particular teaching of Christ, this wonderfully weird command of Christ, don't cast your pearls, is James 1:19 and 20, which says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Why? Because human anger does not produce the righteousness or that truth that God desires. And remember, we're after God's righteousness, and that's not being right, that's living right. And it is discretion that we absolutely need in order for that to be our reality. Does that make sense?
Well, and it made me think that where it does not produce the righteousness that God desires, human anger, because human anger is based on our own truth rather than on the truth of God.
Yeah, notice human anger versus God's anger. So God's anger is simply his curse or his wrath that we know that is the opposite of his blessings. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes we try to justify our anger because we're created in the image of God, but his anger is not the same as human anger here. Ours absolutely is developed through our feelings that are triggered by what is said and we're not listening or something happens, where God's anger is just simply that. If you read the book of Deuteronomy, this is very clear in chapters 27, 28, 29, that there's a clear anger of God that sits in his curses. And the only reason the curses happen is because you're not honoring God's law or his standards. And so when that happens, you're going to fall in the anger of God every time because it's the opposing of love. And so we have to understand and quit rationalizing, folks, that your anger problem is justified because Jesus got angry. It's somebody who is extremely simple-minded and does not know how to discern the Word of God, is because that's not a reality. Yes, we see Jesus in that experience, but it's not the same anger that you and I have. Ours is out of control. I promise you, Jesus had self-control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it sounds like communication is kind of the key to the whole thing as far as being discreet. Discretion is knowing how to communicate, when to communicate, what to communicate and what not to communicate, things like that.
Right. And of course, it's connected with listening, what we talked about last week. You got listening, and then you got to be discreet with that information that's coming in. And as well, we have to learn how to regulate not only our own emotions, but the emotions that come through the feelings of everyone that's part of that communication process, and making sure that we're being good leaders to make sure that we're charting that course well too. So we're listening to the situation, we're listening to our emotions, and gathering all of that information so that then we can then instruct well. Because that's what we're after. We're going to listen, and can we help? Do I need to say something? And then can I instruct, and can I give some good instructions that will really help the overall purpose of all of this? And then also resolve some problems so we can get back to our purpose. And then, of course, that has everything to do with regulating ourselves, self-control. But again, the point there is communication, listening, discretion, and making sure we are regulating ourselves and others so that we can come up with the best resolve, whatever that might be in that reality, so we can get back to God's purpose, that vision that we're after of God's goodness. And this is radically important because we need to learn how to communicate better in our day and age. And rather than do it through, let's say, just our own opinions or whatever we think it is subjectively, we have to go after it. We got to go seek God's kingdom in all of these areas of communication so that we can truly be wise. And again, that's all James is doing in James chapter 1 in the sense of he's just uncovering those areas of communication, and we've got to learn. And if anyone lacks any of this, what do? We ask God for that wisdom. And so important.
So rather than me just spewing the content, the information that I know toward you, it's about connecting with each other.
Connecting. Oh my goodness. Communication is not upfront about content. It's about, connecting. And connecting is about bonding, and bonding is about togetherness, and togetherness is a spiritual need of all human beings. Mm-hmm. We use the UTI formula to understand the different spiritual needs. There's understanding, which we're talking about. There's togetherness, and then there's influence, but influence towards God's goodness, not influence to problems and issues and evil. And so critical to truly discern communication well and be discreet in how you instruct people with it, because we want to give you the truth, not what we believe it is through our own broken teachings or bad relationships or bad experiences.
So it really piggybacks well on last week's command of judge not, learning to be a good listener.
Yeah, at this point, it's really good to see how all of these teachings, these wonderfully weird commands of Christ, all work together, and we have to be very skillful with these teachings and learn how to bring in certain commands, if you will, to really develop or create something that's going to be extremely meaningful and purposeful towards God's plan, and also our life, what our part is, and then we'll help others with that. So it's critical to understand that. Hopefully at this point, whether it's this command number 17 out of the 49 that we're going to be looking at, but once you understand and get these habits, these teachings and these habits into your heart, then you start using them as a wise person, where you're truly adding value to life and making things better in all of your relationships and with other people, where you're truly fulfilling the great commandment with God, yourself, and others, and fulfilling the Great Commission, doing what we're called to do as Christians.
Let's, in the final few moments that we have here for this week, Drake, let's give some practical steps, I guess, if you will, that folks can do in order to begin that process of developing discretion.
Yeah, quickly. What comes to mind is I can give you three things quickly. Number one, go back to last week, practice listening. Go after listening and learn what it truly is. And again, last week we covered that topic, I believe, very well. Mm-hmm. And then so that's number one, practice listening. Number two, practice seeing the good in others. Let's go back to that perspective of God. Our worldview, our philosophy as a Christian, yes, our theology, but I'm talking about our system of thought now. That's philosophy. Our ultimate belief is goodness. And we have to see people, all human beings, in their goodness. Yes, some of them on a scale to 1 to 100 might be 1 or 2, but you're required to see them in that 2% and help them, develop them with permission. If not, well, don't waste your time. Listen to it. Be discreet.
Don't cast your pearls.
Yeah, don't cast your pearls to them because they're just going to rip it apart anyway. Well, fine, but you still see them in that, and you pray for them, and you say, okay, thank you, and you move on. So practice seeing the good in others. Let me say this. Practice seeing the good in yourself as well, because once you are a Christian, you're no longer identified as a sinner, but a saint. I don't know how to preach that anymore, but that our identity comes from Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, and our perspective comes from God the Father, and then Jesus leads us to that goodness through these commands that we're going. And number 3, of course, is self-control. You have to learn what that is. You have to learn how to control your thoughts, how to control your emotions, and learn how to regulate those through those beliefs, through the belief system that we claim to be ours, and that is Christianity. We are Christians, and we are to think and act like Christians, like Jesus, if you will, using those different areas of wisdom in the sense of knowledge, experience, understanding in that common faith where we become insightful people now and for all eternity.
And you can actually use those and need to use those first 2 steps on yourself. Listen to yourself.
Yes.
And practice seeing the good in yourself.
Now, we call it self-leadership. Yes. And as Paul shared with Timothy, let's take care of us and get to a mature position, then we can help others.
Yeah. So the wonderfully weird command of Christ, number 17, don't cast pearls. Drake, hopefully people have a new understanding and perspective and appreciation for what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7.
Absolutely. And let me just say thank you for letting us be real as we put this together, because that's what we want to do. We want to be real so we can connect with you. But at the same time, we really want the very best for you.
That's it. We'll see you next time on Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. If you would like to learn more or have any questions or comments, please feel free to email Pastor Drake at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. To obtain your own copy of the book Wonderfully Weird, please log on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com and click on the button that says Buy the Book. Wonderfully Weird Living is a ministry of 4-dimensional living, offering wholeness coaching for mind, body, soul, and spirit. Also, would you please prayerfully consider becoming a financial partner to help the Wonderfully Weird Living ministry impact more and more lives? Please log on to www.4dimensionalliving.com. That's 4dimensionalliving.com with the number 4. Now, for Pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters, wishing you a wonderfully weird week.